right? But we're about to go into Chapter 2. But before we do, if I say, for example, everybody go to your desktop, you all know what I mean, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Then everybody go to your desktop. All right. Then what I'd like you to do, we're going to start creating some HTML right now. All right. And we're going to do this today in one way, and either tomorrow or Thursday, we're going to do it in a little different way. And it'll make more sense once we get a little further into this. All right. Hopefully you all have got a mouse with you or touchpad or whatever, where you can right mouse click on an empty place in your desktop, choose new, and go over to folder. All right, so please create a new folder on your desktop. All right, so right mouse click on an empty spot on the desktop, right mouse click, choose new, and choose folder. It'll automatically be called new folder, which is a dumb name. And I'm going to give it probably an equal dumb name, but we're going to just call this practice 01, just for now. You may decide later as we get into this, you don't even want this anymore, which is totally fine. You're not turning this in. There is no pressure on this whatsoever. The idea is to start getting familiar with doing things. Now, I'm gonna tell you something, and it may sound a little bit weird, but what I'm trying to teach you is pretty much the standards for the way people do things. All right? Now, you don't do what I'm going to do, but I just wanted to show you something here. What we just did here is we just came in and we created a thing that we called practice 01. All right? And no big thing there. I think everybody gets that. And typically, what people do is under that folder, they create 3 additional folders. We're going to do that in a minute. They create a folder underneath there called CSS. They create a folder underneath there that's called images. And they create a folder underneath there that's called JS. Now, the CSS folder will hold your CSS files. Probably makes sense. Images will hold your image files. All right? Most of your image files will be one of 3 things. All right? It's possible they're bitmaps, but you know most stuff today isn't bitmapped. So probably what it'll be for most people is they'll either be a .jpeg, a .ping, or you may or may not have heard, basically what Google is trying to push on everybody is .webp files. We'll talk about those because there's a whole chapter on images that we'll talk about later. And as you'd probably guess, the JS holds your JavaScript files. Now, what you notice if you look under here is there's no HTML folder. The HTML files historically go right underneath here. They're not in their own folder. All right? And the reason I'm telling you that is what I'd like you to do, because I'm trying to teach you best practices from the get-go. So double-click on your Practice 01 folder, and let's create 3 folders in there. We're not going to probably put anything in there today, or very little, but right-mouse click on there, New, Folder, and it doesn't matter the order in which you do these. I'll do CSS. Then I'll do JS, then I'll do images. And again, what you'll find is sometimes people, instead of calling their folder CSS, they'll call that folder styles. Sometimes instead of JS, they'll actually call the folder JavaScript. Sometimes instead of images, they'll call the folder IMG or IMGS. All right? What I'd rather have you do is come up with a naming structure you're comfortable with. But it should be something along those lines. All right? Now, if I go back here, so now when I go back, I've got my practice 01 right here, and it has inside of it 3 other folders. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Now, hopefully, yesterday you all had the chance to, when you started to actually download the Visual Studio Code. Is there anyone who didn't have a chance to do that, or it didn't work, or whatever? All right, so we're going to try And I'd like you to right mouse click on the folder that you just had there. And do you get down about a third of the way open with code? Because if you get that, just choose that option. Now, let's say it wasn't there. Let's just say it wasn't there. All right. Well, I don't have that. What do I do? The other thing you can do is you can just start up Visual Studio Code, do a file, and do an open folder, and then find it. It works the same way. With many of these commands, there are sometimes literally probably a half dozen ways of doing the same thing. And what I try to do is to show you the way that I think is the most intuitive way of doing it. All right? You may not agree with that as we get going, and if you figure out another way and it works for you, by all means, do it that way. So again, I could do it this way, and I could go to desktop. I could find my practice 01 and click select folder. Either way, it's going to open it this same way. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. All right. So this welcome file that's in here, what's nice about it is it has ways you can create a new file, open a folder. You can do a lot of things through there. I just never use it. So I'm just going to close it. All right. Now, one thing I think it's a good idea, and what I'm about to tell you is, as soon as you create a file, immediately save it. All right? So in other words, I'm going to come in here under File, and I'm just going to click on File, and I'm going to choose New File. And you'll know it worked because you get this number 1 here like this. All right? And even though there's nothing in it yet, I'm going to do a File, and I'm going to go down to Save. And you'll notice by default, it's telling me that it's going to save it underneath my practice 01. And that's what I want. Now, I want you to look at something, please. Don't type this in, but I want you to see this. I'm going to type in here index.html. And that's totally fine. All right? The point is, sometimes when you do that in certain editors, it automatically puts a .txt on the end and makes it a text file. If you want to make sure that never, ever happens, then when you save it, like index.html, put it in double quotes, because that says literally save it like this. All right? You don't have to do that. But I'd like you to create a new file. So, open a new file and save it as index.html. And once you get that in, just click the Save button. And you should be able to see it then right underneath here. It should not be in your CSS folder. It should not be in your images folder. It may look like it's in the JS folder, but it's not. It's standing on its own. Any questions on that? All right. We talked about this yesterday, and I showed you a shortcut. We're going to use it so we can talk about everything that's in there. So if you would, go over, make sure you're in your index.html file. Should be blinking like this. Put in an exclamation point. Notice, if you look up on the screen here, it says, oh, you're using, well, there it is, an Emmet abbreviation. Emmet is a built-in tool that's actually built into this editor. It's in brackets. It's in Atom. I think you can add it to Notepad++, but it's a tool that's designed to make your life easier. All right, so you have less typing that you have to do. So with that exclamation point in there, just hit the Tab key. All right. There is a way for me to move this over because this is too big, but I don't remember what it is. I will, or I'll look it up during the break. But let's go through and start talking about everything that's in this file. I know we kind of looked at it yesterday, but let's just go through all of it because this is some of what Chapter 2 is about. All right? So again, the first line, in this doc type, this can be an uppercase, lowercase, the word doc type, or mixed case. It doesn't matter. This says, in fact, you can look right there, all right, because there's help built into this. But What it's saying is this is an HTML5 document. If it was an earlier document, the doc type would be different. All right, I don't even want to go into it. You can go and look up the history of HTML and you can find out all that stuff if you're interested. All right, this says, remember, HTML is what's called a tag-based language. This is an opening HTML tag. Down at the very bottom, there's a closing HTML tag. All right, the word lang that's in there is what's called an attribute. So for instance, for a human being, you could say first name, last name, gender, height, weight. Those are attributes. They're things that describe. So we're describing HTML and we're saying that the language that we're using in here is English. It does default to English, but I will tell you, and you'll see this later, unless they've changed it, and I'm not sure, because stuff changes all the time. But later we're going to take this document, we're going to do what's called validate the document. And at least when you used to validate the document, if you didn't have lang equals en, you didn't get an error, but you got a warning saying you should be adding lang equal en into here. All right? Okay. Then we've got our head section. Hopefully you remember this from yesterday. Everything between line 3 and line 7 is our head section. That is all information that does not appear on the web page itself. It does not appear on the web page itself. All right? So the first thing that's here says meta. So really lines 4 and 5 are what are called meta tags. Meta is data about data. The first one again says that the character set that we're using is UTF, which is like Universal Transformation Format or something like that. And it's an 8-bit format. As I mentioned to you yesterday, it means that we're using what's called the Unicode character set. When they first made Unicode, it contained like 65,536 characters. Now, the last I heard, it was up over 100,000 characters. They've even got like, I've read this, I haven't gone and looked. I used to go out with a woman who was a Trekkie, and I would watch Star Trek with her, but I've never really been a Trekkie. But they even had like Klingon, was even a language that was supported in there. All right, but really when you think about it, English, German, French, Spanish, etc., they're all in there. And what the character set is, you probably already know this, but for lack of better words, the only things that a computer can understand are zeros and ones. In fact, the first type of computer programming that was done in a language called machine language that you may or may not have heard of. All right? And it was all zeros and ones. That's when computers were as big as this room and they had these big vacuum tubes in them, etc. In fact, if you've never heard the term before, the way that the computer bug came to be was there was a woman, she was a rear admiral in the Navy named Grace Hopper. If you looked at her, from what I heard, she was, pardon my French, but kind of a bitch. But she was about 4.5 feet tall, but everybody listened to her. And she was one of the better programmers of all time. And she was working on a program in one of these machines, and it wasn't working. She couldn't figure it out. She looked at all of her machine language. Everything appeared to be fine. Finally, she took the computer apart, and lo and behold, in front of one of those vacuum tubes was a huge dead moth. That was, no joke, that was the first bug ever in a computer program. That's how it came to be. All right? So, the next thing that's in there, and I think we talked about this yesterday, Viewport basically is the device that you're using to look at the web page. All right? The Viewport we're all using in here, to my knowledge, all right, we're all using a laptop. All right? And you could be looking at it in a tablet. You could be looking at it through your phone. You could be using a desktop or even something else. All right? And again, where it says content equal width equal device width, all right, it's saying use as much of the screen as you possibly can. Scale it originally as 100%, which is 1.0. All right? Then we've got title. And you'll see right now for title, it's just got the word document. All right, let's change that. So where you've got document, just put your name in there. I don't care if it's your first name and your last name. It doesn't matter. All right. And then we end our head. After that, we've got the body section. And in the body section, that's where whatever goes on the page actually goes. All right. So we're going to start and make it real simple. First thing we're just going to type in here is, this is my first web page. I know it's again, we're in the kiddie pool right now, okay? After you've got that in, and if you don't want that, put in whatever statement you want. Again, it doesn't really matter. But go ahead and do a file, go down and click save. And if you don't want to do it that way, Control S should also work to save this. All right. Now, I'm going to show you the wrong way to do something. I don't normally do this, but what we could do is we could close this, we could go to practice, and we could click on our index file. And there it is. And it would work just fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But there is a faster way of doing it. In order for you to do it this faster way, you've got to load what's called a VS Code browser or a VS Code extension in. It's not hard. What do? Well, you can all do this. If you look over here and you look over to the left, you'll see there's a thing down towards the bottom. It looks kind of like a gear shift or gears or whatever. If I take my mouse and I put it over those gears, it says manage. I thought that was it. Hold on. Counts. Okay, we can do it that way. So you click on that, and it brings this up. And we want to choose extensions. So again, if you didn't see that, click over here on this gear, click on there, whoops, and choose extensions. Your screen will change. There are literally hundreds of extensions that you can download for Visual Studio Code. And what they are they are tools that other people have written. All right, some of them do that for a living. They sell them, etc., to try to make your life easier. The one that we're going to look for, and hopefully you're in the box right here. If you're not, then click inside of the box. 2 words. I want you to type in live server. All right. What that's going to allow us to do, and you'll see it in just a minute, is we'll be able to run our web pages without having to leave Visual Studio Code. All right. Now, I probably already have it. No, it doesn't look like I have it in here. I guess because I redid it yesterday. But notice down here we've got a green button that says install. So just click the button. Says that it's installing. Literally, it should take about 10 seconds. There. That's it. It's installed. All right. If I want to uninstall it, there was a button there for it. This live share welcome page, I can close that. I don't need it. Looks like it opened twice. I don't know why, but it did. That's how you add extensions. There are other extensions. I'm going to show you some as we get going. By no means do I profess to be an expert in Visual Studio Code. I know enough where I'm comfortable and I can get by. But there are students who will say, hey, did you know that in Visual Studio there's this extension? Nope, I didn't know that. And one of the things that I'm going to give you in just a bit, because I think I told you already, I've got a flash drive for all of you, and on there'll be a thing that says cheat sheets. And there's a Visual Studio Code cheat sheet on there to try to make your life easier. All right, now to see if this worked, now I'm going to go down and I'm going to find a blank space on my page. I'm going to right mouse click. And you might have to go down a little bit in what comes up, but there should be a thing that says Open with Live Server. So I'm going to click on that. Anybody have any problems doing that? And again, don't be shy, please. What you may or may not notice now, when I brought this up before, when I brought this up like this, when I went over here, you don't have to do this, but when I double-clicked on this, and I double-clicked on index, it came up C:\users \rankin C:\users /rankin /desktop /practice01 /index, etc. But now this one says 127.0.0.1 :5500 index.html. The difference is that, for lack of a better word, that's our IP address, the 127.0.0.1. IP is Internet Protocol. Now, that's not actually the IP address of your machine, because all of ours say 127.0.0.1. We don't all have the same IP address. But as far as running live server, it's saying this is, you're running it on your machine. And it defines your machine as being 127.0.0.1. The :55, that's what's called the port on which the program is running. And there literally are hundreds, if not thousands, of ports that you're able to use. What it's saying is, by default, this is using port 5500. And the file that it's displaying is index.html. All right. Now, we're going to do this, and I'm going to jump back again. And I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and where I've got this is my first web page. I'm just going to add something to it. So I'm going to say, whoops, hope you like it. All right, that's it. And I'm going to save again. So I'm going to do another file, save, so Control S to save. And then I'm going to go back here again, and you'll notice when I go back here, it's been updated without me having to do anything. But if I go back to my other one, see that? See how it's not updated on the one where I double-clicked on it? Then I have to click the button over here that kind of looks like a half of a arrow, and that's the refresh button now that shows there. So you don't have to manually do refreshes when you have live server. All right? It's a little bit of a nicety. If you don't agree with that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it the way that I just showed you. It's totally up to you. All right? So let's explore in here, and let's do a couple of things. Right now, what we have in here is, yeah, technically it's a web page, but there's sure not much in it. It's not formatted. It's not anything. So let's look at a couple of different ways that we could format this. All right? First of all, this is my first web page. Hope you like it. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put around it what are called P tags. P is short for, as you probably guess, paragraph. So now I surrounded this thing with paragraph tags. All right, I'm going to come in and do another Control S to save it. And then I'm going to go back into my live server again, and I'm going to look at it. And again, it doesn't really look any different. But we're going to make another change now, and then you're going to see a big difference. All right? So that's one of the major tags that you're going to use when you're writing text, is a paragraph tag. All right? So let's, instead of P tags in here, let's put in what's called an H1 tag. All right? So replace those P tags with H1. And notice the beginning tag and the end tag, they look the same, except the end one has a / before it. All right? These are called paired tags. Later we'll look at some tags that don't require an ending tag. In fact, we'll look at one in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to do another Control S, and I'm going to go back again, and hopefully you notice the difference. It's bolded now, and the font is bigger. Now, I'm not going to run through each one of these. There is an H1, an H2, an H3, an H4, an H5, and an H6 tag. So there are 6 different tags. You want to play around with them, change them, go ahead and do whatever you want. As the numbers get bigger, the size of the text gets smaller. All right? Now, typically on a web page, you'll only have one H1 tag. There's no law that says you have to do that, but typically that's the way that you set it up. And you do that because that's the main focus of the page, is the H1. All right, so to just show you real quickly, I'm going to change this from an H1 all the way down to an H6. I'm going to save it again and go back, and you can hopefully see the difference. All right. All right, so that's a couple of the tags. Now, jumping back again, one thing you may or may not have noticed, I'm going to go back and make this an H1. I like you to be able to see everything. All right. Now I'm going to do something that's going to look a little weird. You don't have to do this, but I'm trying to show you something here. So after each word that I put in, I'm going to hit the Enter key. All right, so you can see this. This is my first web page. Hope you like it, on about eight different lines. I'm going to save again, and I'm going to go back and notice nothing changed. Because as far as the browser is concerned, good morning, as far as the browser is concerned, okay, any white space that you put in is looked at as a single space. That's whether it's a tab, an Enter key, hitting the space bar. I could have hit the space bar 10 times. It'll show once. What if I wanted these to be on different lines? All right. Then we put in, and we will look at one of these tags that is, I'll just put a couple of them in. After this, you put in what's called a BR tag. BR is short for line break. I'm not going to put them in under each one, but notice after this, I've got a BR tag. And when I go back here again, notice how the rest of it gets pushed down a line. Okay. Now sometimes what you'll see when people put in BR tags, and this is still acceptable, is they'll look like this, either like this, or more often they'll look like that. And it used to be that for every tag you needed to have a closing tag, and since there isn't a closing tag for a BR, that's how you closed it. Sometimes you'll still see that. Some software actually still puts it in like that. Next semester, what you'll see is Visual Studio will typically put that in. All right. All right. Let's see. Let's assume for a second that where I said, hope you like it, let's go and put all this back together on the same line again. So let's assume where it says, hope you like it, that what I wanted to have there was I wanted where it says, hope you like it, I wanted all of that to be bolded. You with me? First, I'm going to show you the old way of doing it, which is not recommended. Then I'm going to show you the new way of doing it, which is recommended, and I'll explain the difference. All right? So I'm going to come in here where it says, hope you like it, and I'm going to put in a B tag. All right? And then I'm going to end my B tag. All right? Now, I'm going to get rid of this H1 because it's going to automatically be bolded without it. So I got rid of the bolding. This is my first web page. And then B tag, hope you like it. Control S, go back. And what you should notice is the hope you like it is bolded. That is the old way of doing things. Unfortunately, the new way of doing things, you have to do a little bit more typing. Now, the reason that it's not recommended that you do that anymore is there are many, many people in this world that use browsers that are blind. Bolding means nothing to them. All right? So what's recommended is rather than using that tag, and that B tag is what's known as a deprecated tag. Somebody asked me once, so what's deprecated? Okay? And we're all deprecated, right? I mean, sooner or later, we're not going to be here. But it's a little different in here. There are tags that are deprecated, which means when you do new development, you shouldn't use them. But if you went through every website in the world, there would be trillions of B tags in there. People are not going to change them. All right? But if you did, you change it so that rather than using B, you use the word strong. Like I said, it's a little bit more work, but you use a strong tag. That's what's recommended. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back again, and it doesn't look any different. but it all has to do with the kind of emphasis that when you've got a speaking browser that it uses. All right. So if you said to me, hey, Jeff, I'm making this website for my friend, all right, and it's of his vacation, and blind people aren't going to look at it anyway because they can't see it. Can I just use B tags? There's no HTML police. There's nobody who's going to make sure you do something or don't do something. All right. All right. The other thing, the other tag I'm going to show you, we're going to take a break in just a minute, but the other tag that I'm going to show you here is I'm going to replace that strong tag, and I'm going to put in, again, this is old, I'm going to put in I tag. You may or may not have already figured it out. I stands for italicize. I'm going to save. I'm going to go back into here, and hopefully you can tell by looking at that, if I make it a little bigger on the screen, you can see that that's italicized. All right. But again, much of this having to do, again, with browsers for the blind or the sight impaired, whatever you want to call them, is you come in here, and the recommendation today is not to use an I tag, but rather to use what's called an M tag, EM. And that is short for emphasis. So I save it, I bring this back up again, and guess what? It doesn't look any different. All right. Now, I may or may not have said this to you before, but I'm going to say it again anyway, and that is, I'm going to go out here to w3schools.com, just period. Just w3schools.com. And if you look, I'm going to go under tutorials, and I'm going to choose Learn HTML. There's the HTML tutorial. This has got so much more in it than I'd have the chance to give you. I mean, we could go over all this and spend 2 weeks on this, and you'd probably be pretty expert at it. But sometimes in life, and especially in this field, it's not memorizing diddly. It's knowing where to go when you need to find something. All right? And somewhere in here, and I'm gonna just do it through here. I'm going to type in HTML tag list. And somewhere in here, there it is, tags. HTML in a nutshell, if you look on the screen here as I go down, that's HTML. It's all those tags. All right, we're not going to go over all of them. There's just, it doesn't really make any sense to. I'm trying to introduce some of the major ones to you right now. All right, and some of the ones in here, you'll notice they got red. It says they're not supported in HTML5, which means, again, they have been deprecated. All right, so the recommendation is that you do not use them. Now, if you look here, it says, well, this isn't deprecated. It's considered a better practice to use a strong tag than a B tag. It's considered better practice to use an M tag, EM, as opposed to an I tag. What you're doing is, if you remember from the test we just took, you're helping with user accessibility. All right. So with that said, it's just about 9:15. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 9:25. I am going to start going through Chapter 2, but what you're going to find is a lot of the stuff that's in here I've already covered. All right. So like I said, come back, please, in about 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to start back up, and I'm going to go into Chapter 2. So I'm going to kind of, for lack of better words, bounce back and forth between what we've been doing and Chapter 2. So in this chapter, you learn how to create and edit HTML and CSS files. That's what we're doing. We're going over the HTML syntax now. We're going to build a simple CSS file also. All right? And rather than showing how to do some things in brackets, I'll show you how to do some things in Visual Studio Code. And then we will go back and we will see how to validate both our CSS file and our HTML file. All right, and again, as I mentioned, with these books, usually what's on the left-hand side is a lot of text, and what's on the right-hand side are pictures or code. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the right-hand side. I've already gone over the basic structure with you. If If you don't like my explanation, you can read what's on pages 46 and 47 for yourselves. But they've got an example document here. The only difference between what's in here and what we have done, if you take a look, you'll notice their title is different. And you may or may not have noticed this, but this is, there it is. So notice my title. It's what, it's my name. It's what we put in there for the title before. You should notice that with yours too if you change the title tag. Their body has a single H1 tag followed by a bunch of paragraphs. All right? But it's very similar to what we've been doing. I've just been putting a little bit of text in as opposed to a lot of text. All right? So, again, I don't think there's anything in here that we haven't talked about. When you create an HTML document, this stuff basically, it's going to build something in the background that, for lack of better words, is invisible. That's called the DOM. It's the Document Object Model, which we'll have a whole chapter on later on in the course. But the point is, anything that's in there, you can, for lack of better words, program. And when I say program, I don't mean programming language. I mean you can add CSS to make anything happen. So, for instance, if we wanted to take the, where it said, I hope you like it, we could have made that page, that line, zoom in and out or whatever. And we're going to do some of that stuff as we go on. All right. So, I've shown you the H1 tag, I've shown you the P tag, I've shown you the BR tag. Now we have not looked at the image tag, we haven't put in an image yet. All right, let's just pretend that we have one already. So let's just take a look at what's in there. All right, when you put this in, this is at a minimum what you're going to want to put in here. The word IMG, that's the name of the tag. And you'll notice if you take a look up on the screen or in your book, this is one of those self-closing tags. There is no ending /IMG tag. Don't put one in. All right? And the two things that are in there are the source, which is where your image file exists. So for us, if we go and grab an image, all right, if we go and grab an image, we would put in source equals, and we'd have in here images / then the name of the file, because it's considered better practice to put your images into an image folder. All right? And this, the alt tag, my guess is probably every one of you at one time or another, you've gone to a website that's supposed to show you a picture, and it doesn't have that picture. For whatever reason, it's not there, and you get a little box with a red X in it. That's the alternative text. It'll show that way. Also, again, for people who are sight impaired, that's what they'll, if they've got a browser that talks to them, that's what it'll show. So it's considered bad practice to not put an alt tag in, even if it's a simple image. Now, I'm going to show you this. Don't worry about doing it now because we're going to have a whole chapter on it later. But I'm just going to come out here, and I'm literally just going to run out here right now quickly, hopefully, to Google Images. All right? And I'm going to grab, there's a dog. Okay? Now, this one's fine. It's just the first one that's there. I'm going to right mouse click on this, and I'm going to choose Save Image As. And I'm going to say, I'm going to go back to my desktop, into my Practice 1, into my Images folder, and I'm just going to call this dogs.jpg. Okay? So I put that in. Now I'm going to go back into my document, and very similar to what the author just did, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say IMG for image, source equals. Now watch when I put this in. As soon as I put in images / all right, there's dogs.jpg right here. It knows it. So if I click on that, it puts that in for me, which is kind of nice. And I'm going to put alt equal dogs playing. Maybe it's kind of stupid, but it works. All right, and I'm going to save. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at this again. Where is mine? No, I don't think I have it up anymore. So let's bring it back. Right mouse click. Open with live server, and there it is. Now there's no formatting that's been done on this. You're going to learn how to float text around images, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that we could do. Now, I'm going to show you other things that you can do. These are not recommended. All right. The first thing, just so you know, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find my image folder, and I'm going to take my mouse and I'm just going to literally just put it on the image as soon as it comes up. And it says over here that the dimensions on here are 300 by 168. So that means it's 300 what's called pixels, 300 pixels wide, 168 pixels tall. All right? And now, and again, you don't have to do this, but I'm just showing you this. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to right mouse click on this and I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to open it with Microsoft Paint right here. Okay? And then I'm going to say that I want to resize the image. I've got two ways that I can do this. I can use percentages and I can use pixels. I'm going to go to pixels and I'm going to change this from 300 to 100. And you'll notice that once I do my horizontal, my vertical, which is my height, will automatically change. So I'm going to make that 100. Now, if I want to change one, but I don't want to change the other, all I do is I check that box right there. All right, but I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to say File, Save. All right, now I'm going to go back in here into my live server, and hopefully you can tell it shrunk down. It's now a third of the size that it was. All right, the other thing that I want to do, again, just because I'm trying to show you a bunch of stuff here, I'm going to purposely make a mistake. Instead of images dogs, I'm going to put dog. I made a mistake in there on purpose. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go back into live server, and notice now it doesn't have the X anymore, but it says dogs playing. That's the alternative text. So when you get, that's the reason that you put that in is, again, for you in case you put a wrong path or a wrong file name, and for accessibility purposes for people who are sight impaired. All right? Okay. Let's jump back. Yes, that's all it would say. And again, as you probably guess, if I'm making a website for people who are sight impaired, I'm going to, I don't have to worry about pictures necessarily, but I'm going to, there's other things, there's other attributes you can put on there. There's titles and everything else that you can put on there. And if I was setting up something for people who were sight impaired, it wouldn't just say that. I would have a much more detailed explanation. Okay, now, correct and incorrect nesting of tags. Notice here we got a P tag, and inside of the P tag there's an I tag, beginning and end, then an ending P tag. Can everybody see what I'm talking about right here? You have to put this, since that P tag is first, it has to end with a P tag. If you do this, here's some bad news. It actually might work. But when you get to where you go in and you try to validate it, you'll get an error. So outer tag, and the inner tags inside of both outer tags. It's not my rule, it's just an HTML rule. All right. Those are called nested tags. I already mentioned some of the attributes to you. We've already looked a little bit at these. Let's take a look at an href. All right. Now, one thing, you've all seen this, my guess is, but you've all seen something that looks like this. In fact, let me change this back to dogs so it looks a little nicer. But let's come back in here, and I'm just going to put a paragraph in here, and I'm going to say this. Click here to go to the Rankin Technical College website. Whoops, website. Now, I don't have any link, so when I go back here and I look at this, it doesn't show anything, which you'd probably guess. Now, what is not recommended is what I'm about to show you. All right? And that is, I'm going to literally add the tag in. So where it says here, I'm going to put it's an anchor tag, href for hypertext reference, equals, and I'm going to put in double quotes, https://rankin.edu, end that, and end my, after the word here, that's where this should go, fortunately, right there. All right, so now what have I done? Let's take a look. You see how now the word here is hyperlinked? And if I take my mouse and I put it over that, in the bottom left-hand corner, it shows where it's going to go. All right? So if I click there, now my page has been replaced with Rankin's homepage. That's considered, there's two problems with what I just did. Number one, you shouldn't hypertext a word like here. A person should know, if I'm saying Rankin Technical College website, that's what really should be hypertext. See what I'm saying? You should have text that describes, the hyperlink text should describe what it is you're trying to do. All right? That's the first thing. The other thing is, this is considered bad. You've all heard of the word etiquette. Etiquette for the internet is called Netiquette. This is considered bad netiquette because I replaced my page with this page. That's not, no. If it was part of my website, that would be okay. This is not part of my website. So what I should say, and again, we're going to go over all this stuff, so it's not like you really have to worry about it right now. You're going to see it in, again and again. But I'm going to say in here where I've got this href, right after this, I'm going to say target equals underscore blank. And let's look at the difference. All right, whoops. So on here, it doesn't look any different at all. But when I click here now, notice I have one tab open, and now I have two tabs open, because I said open it in a blank tab. The other disadvantage of doing it the other way is now somebody is over here at Rankin, they've left my website. And if the idea is, let's say I'm trying to sell something, you just left. So I potentially just lost money. So if you want to open up an external page from the site you're in, you should always put in the target attribute in there, and it should say target equals underscore blank. All right? Okay. Now there's other things that we're going to do in here. Here's a Boolean attribute. What's Boolean mean? Boolean means true or false. A lot of times what you'll find is when people create variables, things that they make on their own that are Boolean, they start it with the word is. Like is married. Okay, now you use, well, I'm separated type of, no. To the computer, remember, there's no gray area. It's yes or it's no. So a Boolean variable can be true. So if it's is married, that means you're married. Or it can be false, which means you're not married. If it's a variable that can have a gray area, you don't make it a Boolean variable. Now, it used to be, a few years ago, you had to literally say, if you want this to be checked automatically, you had to say checked equals checked, which was just stupid. So they cut it down, and they said if you put checked in there, it'll automatically be checked. If you leave the word checked off, it won't be checked. All right? Again, you're going to learn a lot of this stuff is later on in the book. All right? All right, next. This word right here is going to become very important to you as we go on, and that is, whoops, that is the word div. All right? And div, darn it, this thing sometimes, okay, well, I'm going to have to hold it like that just for a minute. There we go. The word div means division. And if you want to take and put a bunch of code on your web page together, you typically will stick it into a div. All right, is that big a thing? Well, a div is what's known as a block level element. So you'll automatically have a blank line before it and a blank line after it. All right? And it'll become more important and apparent how we're using it as we go on. All right? The class I'm going to hold off on for just a minute, because in a couple minutes we're going to create a CSS file for this. All right. Comments? a comment that you put into a program is totally ignored by the system. In other words, you might put that in there to show somebody what it is you're trying to do. The way that you put in comments into an HTML document, just so you know, let's say that I wanted a comment here that said, because of course it's my first web page, I'm excited. So what I do is I put in a less than sign, an exclamation point, dash dash, and notice it automatically puts in the ending. That's the ending for the comment, and it turns green, which says that it's going to be ignored by the system. So I'm excited. If I want to, I can make that multiple lines too. All right, but a comment is something that is ignored by the system. Now, one thing is, if you put comments all over the place in your program, as you'd probably guess, the program gets larger. All right? And occasionally what will happen is people put so many comments in, they get what's called page bloat. And it can take a little longer to load because it's one more thing the system has to go and load in. Even though it doesn't use it, it has to load everything that's on the page. White space I already talked to you about, so that's nothing new there. Oh, but one thing I did not mention, what if, all right, I wanted to have, let's get this back, but let's just say where I've got, this is my first web page. Let's just pretend for a second I want 3 blank spaces in between the this and the is. You with me? I want 3 blank spaces. I get 1 by default, but if I do this, I still have 1. So what I do is I come in and I put what's called an HTML entity, which again we're going to talk about. But I put ampersand NBSP, and I'm going to put in 2 of them. Ampersand NBSP. That stands for non-breaking space. All right, and I'm going to do a Control S, and now notice that when I bring this up, see the spaces? That's something you may end up using. Typically, if you end up using a lot of that, you're not formatting very well. And what you're going to find is it's not going to look exactly the same on each browser. All right? And it can look, for lack of better words, kind of like a hack, for lack of saying something better there. All right. Oh, and they do this a lot in the book. Here's their coding recommendations. One thing is use white space to indent. Don't have everything line up way in the end because it's just hard to read. Take stuff that belongs together and put it together. Don't overuse white space. Not only does it add to the size of the file, but it can make the file harder to read with too much white space in it. All right, so we talked about comments. Let's go in and talk then about CSS. CSS is cascading style sheets. So what we're going to do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into my file here, and I want to make sure I've saved what I've got. So I'm just going to do a Control S to save. All right, then what I'd like all of you to do, please, is go to File and go to New File. All right, and again, we're going to immediately save this file. So I'm going to do a File, Save As. This one, we don't want to save out here. We want to save this one under our CSS folder. So double click on your folder that says CSS. And again, I'm going to use the double quote trick I showed you before. Call this style.css, which is a common name for your CSS file. It doesn't have to be called that. Sometimes what people will do is, let's assume, for example, that I'm making a program that's going to be about a calculator. Sometimes what people will do is they'll call their HTML file calculator.html, they'll call their CSS file calculator.css, and they'll call their JavaScript file calculator.js. There's nothing at all stopping you from doing that. All right? So I've got style.css. I'm going to put this in. And for right now, just because I want you to see how it works, okay, I'm going to put in two things. I'm going to put in here body. All right. Now I've got something, your stuff may or may not be yellow when you do this, because there's another brackets thing that I've already added to mine. All right. And it's no big thing. So if you have it, fine. If you don't have it, fine. All right. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say in my body, I'm going to want my background color, and I'm just going to make this kind of wild. So we'll say purple. And I'm going to say my text color, let's make that then white. All right. So I'm saying that what I want here, and that should be a semicolon, not a comma. That might be why I'm getting that error. There we go. That's all. What that says is now for this document, I want the background color to be purple, that it even shows it to me. And I want my text color to be white. Just so you know, you can write here either background or background hyphen color. Either one of them will work. I'm just picking the one that has less typing for me to do. That's all. Now, if you look, please, you don't have to do this, but I am going to do another file save, and I'm going to go back to here, and nothing changed. I have to create an association between the file I just created and my HTML file. In other words, right now, my HTML file has no idea that the CSS file exists. All right? And the way that I'm going to show that it exists is back into my HTML file, in my head section, and you can put it anywhere in here. I'm going to put it right after my title, so right near the end of that section. I'm going to put in what's called a link tag. So I'm going to say link rel equals style sheet href equals css slash, and again, it knows that it's called style.css. Like that. All right. Now, you want to type that in, fine. You don't want to type that in, again, also fine. But I do want to show you something. I'm going to remove this. So don't worry about it. It'll come back in just a second. But I want to show you. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back in here again. Well, I don't know what happened. Okay, I'm going to type in just the word link. And I'm going to hit the tab key. You see what it did? That's just another thing that's available to you from using VS Code. All right. So it already knows rel equals style sheet. So now all I have to do is put in the href. CSS slash, and again, it shows you style.css. Now when I put this in and I save and I go back to my program, you can already tell what's changed. All right. So the CSS put in our content, the HTML put in our content, the CSS we use for aesthetic purposes, for lack of better words. All right? And what you'll find as you go in here is there are certain colors that play off of each other very well. For instance, do you know this? Approximately 10% of the people in the world are colorblind. My brother, my oldest brother, is one of those people. It took him 6 tries to get into the Navy. They didn't want to let him in because A, he's colorblind, B, he has totally flat feet. And I don't know who he had to convince, but it took quite a while for him to actually get into the Navy. The reason I'm telling you that is with him, what you'll see occasionally is somebody will use like a light purple for a background and a dark purple for the text. It can be very hard for people who are colorblind to go and disassociate between those two things. Even with this doesn't look terrible, but if I kept that text black, it's hard for a lot of people to see. Also, and again, just throwing some stuff at you here, you may or may not be aware of, that the worst color on the central nervous system is the same color as my shirt. It's red. So that literally, you know, for example, if I was going to make a website and I was going to create it for people who have seizures, I wouldn't make my background red. And I wouldn't have stuff flash all the time. All right, I mean, there's just certain things you should or should not do. All right, so there's a couple things. Now, I'm going to go back here again, and I'm going to go back into my CSS file, and I don't have an H1 tag right now, but I'm going to put that one back. And I'm going to say I want all of my H1 tags, and I want the color. Now, I want it to be green. Now, I can sit there and put in here the word green. Totally fine. All right, just so you know, totally fine. But there's at least probably 5 ways that you can set up colors. I could type in the word green. Works just fine. But I can also put in RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. Or I can put in, I'm going to start this with a hashtag like that. And I'm going to put in, how much red do I want? 0, 0. I don't want any. How much green do I want? FF. I want as much green as you'll give me. How much blue do I want? 0, 0. You see the color I got? That may differ with different browsers. All right? It may not be that exact green, that default, but there's different ways that you can set that up. So there's our H1 tag. Now I've got to go back into my index here, and I want to go back and make this an H1 like it was before. Let's see, this is my first web page. Hope you like it. Oops, I don't know what I did there. And what you'll notice is when I go back again, I mean, it should be pretty obvious. All right, I changed the color of my H1, still has those blank spaces in there, which is fine. This is still italicized or emphasized, which is fine. All right. And I mean, that's starting to just brush the surface. And when you look at this, what does it say here? It says what we just did in an H1, that's called a selector. All right, so that says all H1s that are on the page, in this case, we want them all to be navy. You put what you want to have done in here inside of curly braces. This is called a property. This is the value for the property. After the property name, you put a colon and 1 or more spaces. Then you put in the value and a semicolon. You can leave off the semicolon if there's only one thing or it's the last one. It's recommended to always put a semicolon in there. It's just considered better practice. So they've got more stuff here. Here you notice they use background dash color. H1, here they're doing some H2 stuff. Unordered list, which we haven't even talked about yet, which we will in just a bit. All right. So as it says, these are style rules, and it explains all those things. In your file, just so you know this, please look up on the screen here. If I'm inside of a CSS file and I want to put in a comment here that says, for whatever reason, make all H1s green, I don't use this like we did before. That's not recognized by CSS files. I use a / followed by, as you can see, an asterisk. Make all H1 tags green. And then I end it with an asterisk and a /. So that's how you comment or add comments to a CSS file. All right. And again, we've talked about some of these things in here. We're going to get into IDs and classes. I don't want to throw too much at you right now. So I'll let you read that if you want to. That's fine. Now, here's on how to use brackets to work with HTML files. I've already shown you the dialog boxes. And I showed you how you can go into VS Code and how you can add a new file. We just did that. But it's very similar to the way you do it in brackets. All right? So they've got a bunch of bracket stuff in here, how to open, close, and display. We've done all that already. How to start a new file, we did that already. Their extension manager is a little different, but you can add the same things. All right? Editing a file, again, very similar, but it's the same stuff that we just did. Same thing with starting and editing a CSS file. So we've done a lot of this stuff already. We just did it for a different editor. There are split views. There are things that you can use. I do have the flash drives for you, and I'm going to give those out in just a bit. But again, one of the things I went out, and I don't know which one I used, but I went in and typed in Visual Studio Code cheat sheet. And you've got one or more of those on yours. So, looks like that one I've used. So, keyboard shortcut for Windows, yeah. So, there's a whole bunch of shortcuts. All right. I don't know most of them. Again, I use what I need to use when I need to use it, hopefully. Preview a file. You preview it differently in brackets. There's a little lightning bolt that's up in the upper right-hand corner. That's what we did with Live Server. All right, so it's the same thing. You just use a different mechanism to get there. That's all. Now, let's do this. And I'd like everybody to try this, please. All right? I'd like you, if no matter what you put in so far, I'd like you to go back and first go to your index.html file. So first go to that file and just do a Control-S or a file save. Then go to your style.css file and do the same thing. So either do a Control-S or a file save. So both of those files are now saved. All right? Now, there are different validators for code. All right? And what I mean is, we're going to use the standard HTML validator and the standard CSS validator. That's the ones we're going to use. That's the ones most people use. But there are other ones. Now, I'm telling you this, and this is something we don't have to worry about for 8 or 9 weeks, but technically when we get into JavaScript, JavaScript doesn't have a real validator like these things. All right? But I'll show you tools that you can use that basically do about the same thing. So, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go out onto the internet, and over here, I'm just going to type in here, HTML validator. And what you'll notice is it comes up with this. And I'm going to give you this address so you can all see it. That's it right there. All you don't need to type in the https://. But just type in validator into your address bar. Please type this in right now. Validator.w3.org. You can put in the slash at the end, the /, but you don't need it. So what I've got here in blue, that's all you really need to type in. All right? And that brings up the HTML validator. So I'm going to put it in as well. There it is. Now, there's 3 ways that you can validate. You can do it by a URI, and a URI is basically a URL. Again, we're going to get into all this stuff. You can do it by a file upload, and I don't know why, but I'm going to show you the way I do it. I always click the one that says Validate by Direct Input. Right there. Then I go back to my file that's in Visual Studio Code, and I highlight all of it. The easiest way, Control-A, Control-C. All right? Or you can do a file, select all, and then copy, whatever way you want to do it. All right? But you'll learn your own shortcuts as you go. I did a Control-A, a Control-C. All right? So then I'm going back again, and I'm going to literally just paste that right into this white box, right there. I pasted it in. All right? And it looks like I didn't have everything highlighted. Oh, that's my CSS. I brought the wrong one up. I'm sorry. I want my HTML file, not my CSS file. All right, Control-A, Control-C. Because we're going to do the CSS one next, but it's a different validator. All right, so now I paste it in here. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look lined up like it is exactly on the page. That doesn't matter. But as soon as I put all that in, I click check. And as you probably guess, green is good. So I'm going to show you something right now. I'm purposely going to put something in there that I shouldn't. Remember this before? Unless it's changed. I'm going to remove that lang equals I removed up there in the second line lang equals en. I purposely removed that. And I'm going to try to check it again. Usually what you have to do when you do this is you have to go back again, Control A, Control V, and you have to paste it in again. All right. HTML. All right. And now I'm going to go and click check again. And now notice yellow means warning. It says, hey, you really should have put a lang attribute in there. See that? All right. Now I'm going to put it back in, but I'm going to put in a different error. I'm purposely putting errors in here because this is the kind of stuff we all do. So I'm going to put back, I've got lang equals en. That's all great. But I'm going to come in here, and this h1 that I've got right here, see, I'm going to remove the ending h1 tag. I'm doing this on purpose. So that ending h1 tag is gone. I click check, and the system is telling me now it's pink. Now you have an error. And it says P is not an element of h1 because now it thinks that your paragraph is part of your h1 tag because you never ended the h1. These are the kind of errors you are going to make. Everybody does. When you take your tests, sometimes it'll say something like at the end, I'll have in there, your test will be worth 100 points. And it'll say something like, validate your HTML file so that it has no errors or warnings. That'll be worth 5 points. Validate your CSS file so that it has no errors or warnings. That'll be 10 points or 5 points. Usually you'll have that on most, if not all, of your hands-on tests. All right. So that's the first one. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in CSS Validator. And for some reason it's a little bit got a different name. And again, I'll show it to you right now. So that one, this is the HTML validator. But the CSS validator is jigsaw.w3.org/CSS validator. And again, I don't know how they came up with these names. I'm sure you could Google it if you want to know more, if you want to know the exact story. But you should only have to, I would think, put in that amount. And it should work just fine. All right. Now, the good news is, if you look up on the screen here, it almost looks just like the other one. You've got URI, file, upload, and direct. So I'm going to use direct. But this time, I don't want to put in my HTML file. This time, I do want to put in that CSS file. Control A, Control C. Put that in here. All right, check. And again, green is good. And they even give you a little thing here that says it's been W3C checked. All right. But as you'd guess, if I come back here again, and I'm going to purposely make some mistakes. How about if I leave off that semicolon right there after the word purple? Now, sorry, we found the following errors. And it'll do the best it can to show you where the error is. All right. And sometimes it'll make sense, sometimes it won't. It says missing a semicolon before the property name color. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we go back and we take a look, all right, it's saying right before color there should be a semicolon. So that's a pretty good indicator of what the error is. All right. And there's, of course, as you'd guess, there are all sorts of different kinds of errors that you can make. So if I come in here and let's say that I put in something that doesn't make sense. I'm going to put in here, hello. Okay? And I check. And it comes back and it says, hello is not a valid color. That makes sense. All right? And we'll talk about these colors and stuff. Again, there'll be a whole chapter on that later. But what if I leave off the pound sign? I get a different error. So it's considered good practice It's considered good practice to always go and validate. Now, I'm not going to do this. I did it last year. You can do it if you want to. But I grabbed Rankin's homepage and I put it into the validator. There were hundreds of warnings. All right, I didn't even try the CSS one. Now, the reason that we're going through this and I'm having you do this is it's good practice. All right, I remember that when I got my first coding job ever, and my boss comes over and he goes, puts his arm around me, and I should have known something was up then, but he goes, Jeff, I have a wonderful opportunity for you. Anytime anybody ever does that, just run the other way. Okay, but I just said, okay. And he goes, I've got this maintenance job that I want you to do. He had some code, and it was about 1,000 lines, and it had 3 errors in it. And 2 of them were very hard to find, but I found them and fixed them. Then when I ran it, there were also 100 warnings. And I said to my boss, I said, do you want me to fix these warnings? And he goes, does it work now? And I said, yeah. And he goes, hell no. So that most places live with warnings, they just don't want errors because you can't live with errors. But most websites don't even go to the trouble of going back and validating their HTML and validating their CSS. Now, if you're a government website, there's things like that you're supposed to have to do. Some people do it and some people still don't. All right. So, we went through, they talk about debugging. I just went and manually showed you some errors that you can get. This was validating, so there's the markup service. You just saw it. If you want to, you can click URI and you can just put in the file name in there. You can do that too. The reason I like to do it by direct input is if there's a problem, I can go back and look at it on the screen and know exactly where the problem was. That's why I like doing it that way. But you do it whatever way you want to do it. And again, as we mentioned, pinkish for errors, yellow for warning, green hopefully eventually, meaning everything is okay. And the CSS works virtually the same way. All right? So that's it. So what I'm going to do right now, it's 10:08, and I think we had our last break. We'll have to take a break around 10:30. Okay, somewhere around there. But I'm going to give everybody, this is your flash drive. It's yours to keep. Do whatever you want to do with it. I'm still learning names, so sorry. Take me a week or so, but I will get everybody's name down. I know Angie because she was here last semester. And I know you're one of the Gabes. You gave yes. You're Jim. And you comment? Yeah. And you're Christopher, right? Yeah. And here? You are the other Gabe. And Aaron? That one was really easy. That was one left. All right. Let's, if you would please, and the flash drives have all been checked. It shouldn't have anything bad on it. But if you don't mind, if you want to put it into the system, do it. And if you don't, just watch what I'm doing, okay? Either way, whichever you want. So, this is going to look a little different, but you've all got a folder in there that's called AWD Web Dev Tech. You should. This class is AWD for Application and Website Development, and it's AWD1000, which is Web Development Technologies. Okay, I just called it Web Dev Tech. So, if you double click on that folder, you'll notice that there are a series of folders in there. We're going to go over each one of these folders. All right? And here's the syllabus, and I think it's up to date. It was, well, it might not be. It's got 812 on it, so. This is the template. This has got the new stuff that I sent you, so don't worry if it's up to date or not. It's okay. Here are some URLs, and I think I showed you these before. These are the W3 Schools tutorial sites, all right? And we're going to watch these too. There's a couple tutorials that I'd like to have you watch. I thought of just saying, you know, go home tonight, get onto YouTube and watch these, because there's a couple of them I want to go over. One's 20 minutes and one's 15 minutes. But I thought, you know, I got home last night, and I remember one of you sent me an email about a couple things. But to be honest with you, I hardly ever do this. I got home and I sat down and basically I got up to go to bed. And that was all I did yesterday when I got home. I didn't turn the computer on. I don't normally do that, but I didn't. All right? And I'm thinking, you know, with some of you, you might have jobs that you go before work, after, you know, before you come here, after you come here, whatever. So we're going to watch a couple videos in just a bit. All right? And if you like them, great. You know, these are the two that we're going to watch, the ones that are shown right here. They're from a gentleman named Colt Steele, and I really like the guy. All right? And so if you're interested, you can look at those. But let's look at the rest of the stuff that's in here. I already mentioned the cheat sheets to you. So what you'll notice for the cheat sheets, what do you have? Well, right now we're in HTML. There are some HTML cheat sheets. There are some CSS cheat sheets. There are some JavaScript cheat sheets. There are some jQuery cheat sheets. And there are some Bootstrap cheat sheets. They're not the only ones that exist. I Googled like Bootstrap cheat sheet, looked at a couple and picked out the ones I thought were best. All right? Okay. There's PDFs. I get a lot of stuff. Being an instructor, I get a lot of stuff sent to me. And most of it is open source and it's free to use. All right? So I copied a bunch of those. Some of these things say cookbook. Some of these things say succinctly, but they're all PDFs on things like Git, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Bootstrap and jQuery. Then finally, I've got this thing here that says reviews. All right? Now, I'm not going to go over this. I will tell you what this is. Okay? In the afternoon class, okay, I have one student. There's a lot of reasons for that. We had a very small number starting last year. We had 4. All right? And 2 of them started mid-semester, and that was Angie and Dominic. All right? One of the 4 that came in, 2 of the 4 people stopped coming when we went to an online format. Bottom line is the only guy left that I'm going to graduate in May is Keegan. And if I had my choice, he'd be one of the top ones. I mean, Angie would be 2, but Keegan he gets A's and stuff. He gets things. But the class that he's in with me in the afternoon, we're meeting in that conference room right there because we don't have a classroom. So we meet in there. The reason I'm telling you that is what we're doing this week is we're reviewing HTML, JavaScript, CSS3, etc. because it's been over a semester since he's had that stuff. These are the presentations I made for him. So if you want to look through those, great. If you want to look through them at a later time, great. If you never want to look through them, that's also fine. It's not a big thing one way or the other. All right? So hold on just a second. I'm going to come in here